Okay, so we are ready to start the third panel discussion, which is on investing in equality and dignity. In this session, we will talk about the factors that influence business and investors to integrate environment and social criteria in business decisions. Chairing this discussion is Kiran Karnik, Chairperson Oxfam India. He is the former president of NASSCOM and was also the managing director of the Discovery Network in India. Among his many accolades, he was awarded the Padma Shri in 2007. We will start this session with a presentation. May I welcome on stage Aniruddha Nagar, South Asia Director of Accountability Council in South Asia. Accountability Council works with local partners in the region to assist communities to defend their environmental and human rights.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, thank you. My name is Aniruddha Nagar. I'm the South Asia Director at Accountability Council. For those of you who don't know, we are an organization that supports communities that are affected and harmed by development projects. And we support them to bring their voices to the complaint offices that are tied to these internationally financed projects. So today I'm going to speak about an example of an investor or bunch of investors that had to deal and have to deal with environmental and social issues. And there are examples here of what not to do. I guess there are some examples of what to do and what can be done. So the example that I'm bringing takes us to Assam, to the tea plantations over there. And we're talking about an entity called Amalgamated Plantations Private Limited. This is the second largest tea producer in the state of Assam. It has a very interesting shareholding. So you will see there are some very powerful, influential investors. It was created in 2009, and as you'll see, there's Tata Global Beverages together with its investment arm, the Tata Investment Corporation, that owns about 65% of APPL. You have the International Finance Corporation, that is the private sector side of the World Bank. That owns 16% in this company. And then you have quite an innovative model where you have workers that also own about 9.95% of APPL. So the rationale for creating this company was back in 2006, Tata Tea decided to partially exit, to partially divest from its tea plantations. And so it joined up with the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, to create this innovative model. The idea being that if workers could own equity in the company, then theoretically they could gain agency and lift themselves out of poverty. That was the theory. The practice, as we will see, hasn't been as successful as we would hope. The context, of course, in Assam goes a long way back. I mean, there's a colonial legacy here. We're talking about issues that basically date. There's quite a long structural poverty that is present here. The business of APPL also spans quite an interesting geography. It's quite remote. There are 25 plantations, 21 in Assam, 4 in West Bengal. There's also we just heard about legal risk and the importance of taking that into account. The Plantation Labor Act across the country requires that these tea companies in Assam not only take care of their own working conditions, but also they're required to look at and provide housing and to provide healthcare, water, sanitation. They're also required to provide rations to workers and their families. So in many ways, the plantation model requires that companies take on the functions of the state because of, in part, how remote some of these plantations are. Furthermore, the workers are particularly vulnerable given their Adivasi, their forebears were brought from central India, mainly Jharkhand, Orissa. And so we're talking about a context of bonded or forced labor. This has been described as modern day slavery. Workers are highly dependent on their employers in Assam. Across the state, there are about 1 million at any point of time tea workers. And because of their low levels of education, very low wages, they're engaged in this daily struggle to survive. Tea workers in Assam across the state earn 137 rupees per day. And they are really required to, they look to their employer for everything. As you heard, their housing, their healthcare, their education, everything is dependent on their employer. And so there's a generational dependence. It's very common for families to pass on permanent jobs generation after generation because their housing is tied to that employment. Their healthcare, their education is tied to that employment. So there's very little ability for alternative livelihood opportunities in Assam to really lift themselves out of this economic situation. So very great environmental and social challenges. In 2013, 3 local Adivasi support organizations, PADRA, PAD, and DBSS, filed a complaint with the Accountability Office of the IFC. This is called the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman, or the CAO. And the Accountability Council has been supporting these 3 organizations since 2013 with this complaint. There was an attempt at dialogue with the company, which was unsuccessful. And so the case then went to what's called compliance investigation. That is where the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman does an investigation, comes out, visits the tea plantations, speaks with the company, with workers, with the complainants, and determines whether or not the company and the IFC have complied with the IFC's standards. They're called the performance standards, and they're quite rigorous social and environmental commitments that are required to be met. As you can see from that list, there was quite a number of violations that were found by the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman. This was a report that was launched in November of 2016, so just over a year ago. So we're talking about low wages, restricted freedom of association, hazardous housing conditions, squalid sanitation, broken toilets, dirty drinking water. Exposure to pesticides was a pretty critical violation that was found. And then there was also poor consultation found across the board, but particularly with workers regarding the share program. So workers to this day continue to express dismay and frustration and confusion about what a share involves. There are some 18,000 workers that bought shares. And in terms of scale, the development impact at APPL was potentially massive. There are about 155,000 people that live and work on the tea plantations at APPL across the 25 estates. So we're talking massive development opportunity. That consists of about 30,000 permanent workers and their dependents. Then there's also temporary workers. Unfortunately, when the shareholder program was first rolled out, there were allegations of force and coercion. The tea workers were told, you're going to make, you're going to double your money. You're going to profit in large scale if you buy these shares. Unfortunately, the nature of shares, the fact that they are subject to market risk, the rights that workers have as shareholders, in terms of actual decision-making, the ability to vote at the annual general meeting, every resolution before a company should go to all shareholders and they should have the right to vote. None of that was really explained. So the implementation was the problem. And the CAO did find that there was, as we saw with that list, problems at sort of every level. In terms of the due diligence before the investment, the CEO found that there was just a lack of objective assessment by the World Bank, by the IFC, to determine what was the condition of, living and working conditions on the estates. It was found that there was an extremely strong over-reliance on certification. We're talking in particular that here the company, APPL, had committed to get SA 8000 and Ethical Tea Partnership certification, or I think that's called monitoring. Now, it wasn't clear to the IFC, as it should be clear to everyone and consumers, that certification is a promise of compliance. It's not evidence of compliance. And so relying on the Tata brand and that APPL is going to promise to be part of these certification schemes obviously was never going to be sufficient due diligence. Unfortunately, the IFC team only spent 2 days on the tea plantations. And given the massive environmental and social challenges that I laid out earlier, that clearly wasn't enough time to fully assess the huge range of risk, but also the environmental and social challenges that would play out in this investment. So the action plan that was created grossly underestimated what would be needed to achieve not only compliance with the Plantations Labor Act, but also the higher threshold of meeting the IFC's performance standards. In terms of the actual supervision, so once we've established that, yes, the IFC underestimated the risks, what has the IFC done to sort of bring APPL to compliance? I'm just pulling out a quote here from the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, where you can get a sense of how the responsibility of investors is phrased. And here we're talking about leverage. If you're connected as an investor to an adverse human rights impact, then you're supposed to exercise leverage to mitigate that impact or to resolve that impact. The language there is that if there is leverage to prevent or mitigate the adverse impact, it should exercise it. If that leverage is lacking, there may be ways to increase it, or it could try to be involved in other activities like training or capacity building. So what happened here? We saw that in November 2016, the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman released its report. What has happened in the last year and a half? Has APPL, done anything? Has the IFC done anything? What about Tata? Unfortunately, there was, particularly on the part of workers and the 3 local Adivasi organizations, they were overjoyed with the CAO's report. It was 94 pages long, comprehensively found violations. That was very short-lived when the IFC's response came out. The IFC essentially shrugged at the CAO's report. It said, "We disagree with the majority of your findings." It treated the report as nothing more than something to be sort of disregarded, which is extremely disappointing. It did accept some of the findings with respect to housing and sanitation, which is welcome. And it did create this 2-year limited action plan, which it calls Project Unnati. There's a picture there of its glossy report that I've put a question mark over. Unfortunately, the last year and a bit hasn't been a situation that we can say that the IFC and Tata and others have exercised their leverage. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that they have really failed to or refused to exercise any leverage. They have not based their Project Unnati or their action plan on the basis of consultation with tea workers or the complainants. They have not met basic promises that they made. They said in November 2016 that they would, by March of last year, 2017, ensure that every household had a toilet, ensure that everyone had access to potable drinking water, ensure that there was proper financial training for workers so that they understood what shares meant. Unfortunately, none of that has happened. And there has been this constant refrain of, sorry, the finances are not working out. That has been very, very disappointing. We understand that there is, of course, an economic reality here, that finances do dictate various issues. But as I think Abhishek mentioned in the previous panel, there hasn't been leadership, a motivated business leadership by the investors here to really make a change. It seems that, as with Paper Boat, there could be significant impact that is made. If you take the IFC together with the Tata Group, you have an incredible amount of intellectual, financial, human resource expertise. You have two powerhouses. Just the convening power that they have is incredible. Yet, unfortunately, we haven't seen them bring to bear any of that. Any of these resources or sectoral expertise has not been brought to bear. And now we see media reports of Tata wanting to pull out, or not sure what to make of that, but it has been quite disappointing. What would investing in dignity look like? Going from intent to action, there are a number of things that could be done. Here just are a few. But as I mentioned, what it would really take is investing in the workers. They're the workforce. They're the ones picking the tea. Healthy workers are productive workers. We constantly hear this refrain of, oh, so many workers are absent. And staff absenteeism is cited as one of the major problems. If workers are sick because they're being exposed to pesticides, if they're being, not having proper toilets to be able to use, if the drinking water is hazardous, then, it's not rocket science that you need to invest in your workforce if you want it to be a profitable one. And so the things that could be done would be hearing the voices of workers through creating a legitimate action plan that is actually based on consulting with the workers, rather than imposing a project unnati from above. Now, there is a moment of opportunity here, and it was really welcome when the IFC in its action plan did say that they were going to commission an independent third party to hold consultations with workers. Again, we were all overjoyed. Unfortunately, a year and a half has passed and none of those consultations have happened. All we've heard is that they have selected a third party which we would argue is not independent. This is a third party, an NGO that Tata and the IFC have worked with in the past. There is a clear tilt towards the business. This NGO continues to get financial business from Tata. They work together and they're very close friends. And so it boggles our minds how that could be perceived as a truly independent third party. In addition to holding that credible consultation, the idea would be that you create a legitimate action plan that workers are invested in. Once they're invested, you then have to think about how do you fund that action plan. Toilets, houses, they're not going to build themselves. You need money. And Nisha mentioned at the start of the day that there's this increasingly growing divide between the salaries of CEOs and the managing directors. You can look at the APPL annual report and say, well, you could be putting some of this money that you're continuing to give to your salaries for the managing director and the CEO to some of these worker welfare issues. But no doubt there will need to be money coming in from other investors. Like I said, you have the Tata Group involved. The Tata Trusts are known for the amount of money that they put in around the world into these sorts of initiatives. So there's a lot that could be done in addition to financial issues. There could be training with respect to financial literacy, with respect to pesticide sprayers. If pesticide sprayers know that they are being exposed to hazardous chemicals, then they're more likely to demand access to pesticide spraying protective equipment. They're more likely to understand that that's important to wear. If they're actually given the results of blood tests, instead of doctors coming, taking their blood and then never seeing the blood tests, then they might understand what is at stake, and that is their health. So these are some ideas that we could think about to move from intent to action. I thought I'd just end with mentioning that we have created this campaign website called accountability.org, TEA being the spelling, and it sort of documents the whole process with respect to the compliance advisor, ombudsman. It also attempts to get at the point about consumer engagement, as Abhishek also mentioned in the previous panel. The ask here of the consumer is not to boycott Assam tea. Much like the message to Tata and the IFC is don't run away from this problem. Stay in there, continue to show solidarity with the tea worker. So to all of you, it's continue to drink Assam tea, but be aware of what's going on and exercise purchasing power that you have to be able to really assert your purchasing power with respect to Tata and the IFC to ensure that they improve the situation. I've also got a couple of these booklets, I think they're at the back, which sort of document this story in physical form. So if you want a copy of this, then please come to me by the end. Thank you very much.